Hi everyone and welcome to Dennis Deep Cuts, the 28th installment of this fine YouTube series. Today we're talking about the dreaded comeback record. Let's see what happens. So, bands break up for reasons, and then they get back together for reasons, or bands fall apart and then they try to mend fences, and then years later they want to come back together and play shows. And from someone that's done it, one of the most difficult things you can do as a musician is to make a comeback record after a long period of inactivity or being broken up for a long time. So today I'm going to talk about 5 really cool comeback records that are really great. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about my own experiences with the Refused comeback and why we did it, how that felt, and the reception of the record, and maybe what we could have done differently, and what we did right. Yeah, I think it's going to be interesting. So let's dive right in and talk about 5 really cool comeback records. And then at the end, we will talk about this record. It's called Freedom. And yeah, this should be interesting. Let's do it. Let's start with one of the returning guests on this show and one of my favorite artists, and probably my favorite artist, David Bowie, the 2013 record, The Next Day. In 2003, Bowie put out the album Reality, and in the summer of 2004, he was on tour. And on stage in Hamburg, he collapsed and he had a big health scare, which meant he withdrew from the public eye. And for 10 years, there was very few Bowie sightings. I mean, he did some cameos in movies, he did a couple of little things here and there, but there was no touring and no music. And I think everybody just assumed that he retired. He didn't need to tour, he didn't need to put out records. And then kind of out of nowhere, The Next Day drops. And it's a fantastic album, and it's a start of the finish, because as we all know, he only put out one more record before he passed away. And this record is great. It's he's returned with Tony Visconti that he put out a lot of records with, and he put out a really cool, really great comeback record that was unexpected. And it's one of those records when you heard it, you're like, of course, this is the Bowie record that I've been waiting for a long time. That being said, I do think that a lot of his 90s and early 2000 output is pretty cool. I think there's a lot of good stuff there. And maybe he was also a bit frustrated that they didn't get the recognition that some of that stuff deserved. But The Next Day feels very much like Bowie saying, like, here's David Bowie, here's what I'm capable of. It's kind of a dark record, but it is fantastic. I really like it, and I think it's a super cool comeback record. There's of course no touring and not a whole lot of stuff happening around it, apart from the fact that he put it out and then he put another record out before he passed, and for that we are eternally grateful. And I also love the pastiche of the Heroes record, where he just kind of like, the next day, here's what happened after all that. And I think it's a cool record. You can hear a little bit of Bowie throughout his career in this record, but it still sounds kind of modern and fresh. A pretty awesome comeback, if you ask me. In between the 2 Bowie records, there was a 10-year gap. The next band I'm going to talk about had a 23-year gap between their last record and then a comeback record. I'm talking about Crime of the City Solution. They put out their record Paradise Discotheque in 1990, and in 2013 they put out the comeback record American Twilight. So yeah, 23 as 2013 also seems to be a good year for comeback records. Crime of the City Solution started kind of like an Australian band in the late 70s. And throughout the 80s, they put out a bunch of fantastic records. Definitely one of my favorites. In 1990, they broke up, and the singer Simon Bonney went on to do 2 really awesome Americana solo records in 93 and 95, I think. And then he kind of disappeared. He moved to Detroit, where he got this new band together, which is kind of, there's a couple of people from Crime and Solution back in the day, but there's people from the Swans and from Einstürze Neubauten and a whole slew of cool characters, and they put out this record, and I think it's fabulous. I think it's a bit different from their earlier angular, weird stuff. It's more straight ahead. It's more rock and roll, actually. But I think it's a fabulous album, and I think it's definitely worth checking out. It's now been 10 years since this record came out, so I'm waiting for the second comeback of Crime and Solution, and according to the rumors, there might be new music in the works, which would be super, super exciting. But yeah, their entire discography is worth checking out, and if you like your rock and roll to be great, then check out this record. Next band is one of my favorite metal bands of all time. I've talked about them a little bit earlier on the show, and I'm talking, of course, about Swiss progressive metal rockers Celtic Frost. And in 2006, they put out their comeback record, Monotheist. They broke up in 1989, so it's 17 years in between the records. Celtic Frost actually broke up after Into the Pandemonium, which around 1987-88. Tom Warrior, the main guy, put together a new version of Celtic Frost and put out in 1988 he put out a record called Cold Lake that people really, really, really hated. It's like a new version of Celtic Frost, and he was going for a bit of a different sound. People hated it so much. I kind of love it. I think it's a pretty cool record. I might have to do an episode where I talk about Cold Lake in depth a little more, because it's a bit of a misunderstood record. But the backlash was massive, so he kind of like backtracked a little bit, and then he put out a record in 1989 called Vanity Nemesis, and he tried to tour that, but kind of got dropped from the label, and the backlash from Cold Lake was so massive that he was like, I'm just gonna call it quits. He did a band in between called Apollyon Sun that wasn't really that well received. So in 2006, they put out this record, and it's exactly what you want from a Celtic Frost record. It's progressive, weird, strange, kind of at parts impenetrable because there's so much going on. And I love this record, and I think this is not one of the best Celtic Frost records, but it's definitely up there among the best Celtic Frost records. And I mean, I'm a fan of their entire catalog. If I'm saying that I don't mind Cold Lake, then you know that I really love Celtic Frost. But this is a super cool comeback record. They did some touring, and then they broke up a little bit after that again. And then Martin, one of the other main guy from Celtic Frost, died a couple of years back. So I think that's it for the band. But if you want to check out a really cool, progressive, weird, dark metal type of record. So this next record is a bit, I wouldn't say weird, but it's a bit different because it's not, I mean, it's a comeback record because this person hadn't done a solo record in 10 years when he put this record out, but he's still been putting out records. 6 years before this record, he put out a record with Walker Brothers. And I'm talking, of course, about Scott Walker with his 1984 record, Climate of Hunter. Scott Walker, of course, rose to fame with the Walker Brothers in the mid-'60s. Then he put out some solo records that are amazing. And in the 70s, it was a bit frustrating for him, only sporadically putting out records. And his last solo record is in 1974. So it's 10 years in between his last solo record and this Climate of Hunter record. And in 1978, the Walker Brothers put out Night Flight, which I talked about already. It's one of my favorite, like going out, I think it's Going Out With a Bang episode where I talked about it. That's a fantastic record, but it didn't really do that well. And it was quite for another 6 years before he put this record out. And it's a strange, weird record, and people love like his crooning voice and his grand orchestral arrangements. And this record doesn't really have anything of that. It's like an 80s pop rock record, but with weird esoteric soundscapes, and it's kind of quirky and strange, and it's like a avant-gardistic take on 80s pop almost. Um, it reminds me a little bit of later era Talk Talk records, that kind of like dreamy quality to it. Um, and I think this record is really cool and really different. And I love his voice. I love this strange 80s production that still doesn't really sound like the 80s pop that I think that he thinks he's doing for some reason. It would be another, I think almost another 10, 11 years before he put out another record. And that was the avant-garde masterpiece Tilt. And Scott Walker, just his career is just so many fantastic records, and from the 90s onwards, he dabbled into avant-garde and experimental music mostly. But yeah, his recorded legacy is pretty amazing, and this is a really cool but weird record. It doesn't really sound like any of his other solo records, because it used to be sweeping, huge arrangements and crooning, and then after this record, it just became weird experimental music. So it's a weird little like time capsule of Scott Walker's 80s pop period. It does share some similar traits with Night Flights, but it's not as direct as that record, I think. But it's a super cool comeback record. And then, you know, so most of the albums that we talked about today have been records where it's been a couple of records, or they came back with one record, then they broke up, or they died, or whatever. Well, the last band I'm going to talk about today is one of those bands that they were gone for 12 years, and when they came back kind of in full force with like a new lineup and a new lease on life. And I am, of course, talking about Swans. My father will guide me with the rope to this guy. Swans broke up in 1998, and in 2010 this record came out. And Michael Gira, the main guy in Swans, spent the interim years with his pretty awesome band Angels of Light, and also doing his record label Young God. Swans, of course, is like a noise rock band from New York City that put out I would actually have to say, a shit ton of records from the early 80s until the late 90s. And they're noisy, abrasive, and then they got signed to major labels, and they started doing something very different and very atmospheric and chanted kind of weird music. And they broke up in 1998. Their last record, I think it's called Soundtrack for the Blind, which is like just a massive piece of work. 2010 they got back together, and for the last 12 years they've been putting out consistently amazing record with like a completely new lineup of the Swans. A couple of years ago they put out a record that Michael Gira said was going to be the last record with this lineup of the Swans, and I think this year he's putting out a new Swans record with what I assume is going to be a new lineup. But yeah, it's cool when the record can be like, we're back, and now we're back as a band, and we're just going to continue on, and that's what they did. It's a feat that very few people managed to do, and that's what we're going to talk about now. So let's get it for the Refused comeback. Where to even begin? Refused broke up in 1998 amidst chaos and violence and destruction. We talked about this in plenty of interviews, and you can also watch Chris's beautiful movie, Refused are Fucking Dead, if you want to see a bunch of angry young men talking about them being even angrier, and then the band breaks up. In 2011, we got another offer from Coachella to play Coachella, and I assume there'd be another, let's politely turn it down and continue on with our lives. but this time it was different. Everyone in Refused was living in Umeå. Chris, David, and Magnus was actually playing music together. Me and David did a band called AC4 together, so we were all hanging out, and the stars were aligned, and we said, yeah, maybe we should do this. And the initial idea was, let's do a couple of festivals and see what happens. And then we started practicing, and we had a really good time together, and we really enjoyed the music, and we felt the music felt great. And I think when we broke up in 1998, it didn't feel like we can do that record justice, really. We felt like it was a little bit above our capacity, maybe. Even though I heard some live recordings from 98, it sounds pretty awesome. So the idea was at first maybe to do 8 to 10 shows. We ended up doing 82 shows that year, which is insane. Midway through the year, and I'm still thinking that this is going to be the Refused year, and then, we're done. But midway through the year, Chris and David asked me if I would be interested in recording more music, or recording a song or more songs. And I was quite skeptical at first, because I know about the comeback record. I know the pressure that it is. But I said, yeah, maybe let me hear if you have any music. And they played me the track, an early demo of Electra. And I was quite blown away. And I was like, I think we can work with this. So when we played our last show in Umeå in 2012, we already knew that we're working on new music. We were start working on new music. But we didn't want the pressure of having everyone's opinion about what we should do and how we should do it, what kind of music we should make. So we didn't tell anyone. I mean, for a long time, I didn't even tell my friends. I was just secretly practicing with Refused, because we didn't need that. I mean, the pressure from ourselves in itself was big enough to sort of weigh us down. We didn't want the added extra pressure of people from the outside. So we're doing this secretly, and we're actually practicing a lot. And I think us practicing that much was just a way for us to sort of deal with what it means to do a comeback record, what it means to do record after, 17 years, I think, in between Shape and Freedom. And I think at the end, maybe we practiced a little bit too much, and we tweaked the songs too much because we felt that pressure. And it was funny because we're trying to keep it a secret. And then, I remember doing a show with Invasion, and we're playing with Trail of Dead, and Autry was like, oh, what are you guys up to? And I told him that we're working on new Refused music, and he tweeted about it. And I'm like, oh man, you shouldn't have, And then when we went to the studio in LA, Magnus started posting pictures on his Facebook about us being in the studio, and we're like, no man, it was all fun, but there's a lot of pressure. And in 2015, as I said, 1998 to 2015, 17 years, we put out Freedom to, let's say, mixed reviews. It's one of those things where for 17 years, people have been praising Shape of Punk. People have been talking about that record, and people have been living with that record and discovering the music with their friends or their loved ones. And then that music grew inside them, and it meant something. And can't compete with that. That's just kind of what it is. You can't compete with people's nostalgia or people's, how they grew up with music. That's the same thing. If I hear a new record with a band that I fell in love with when I was 15, there's no way you can recreate those feelings that you had when you were 15 or 16 or 20 or 25. So we kind of knew that it was, I wouldn't say an impossible task, because a couple of songs that the guys played me, or a couple of songs that we wrote, I was like, these are great songs. These are songs that could fit on Shape easily, but it was a different time and a different place. So we ended up creating a record that we wanted to create, and that for us felt bold and adventurous and of that time. And I think for us it was a predicament because if we'd done, I mean, idiots, you know, we call our last record "Shape of Punk to Come," and you know, so if we'd done anything that sounded too much like Shape, people would be like, "Oh, it sounds too much like the old record." And if you went too far in a different way, people were like, "It doesn't sound like Shape." So that's kind of like the push and pull that you had to deal with. But I felt that we did a record that's true to us at that time and that place. We went to LA to record with a producer called Nick Launay, who did most of the record apart from 2 songs. And then it is interesting how people respond to stuff that you do, because we're back and in people's mind, we're making millions and millions of dollars. And we're doing this comeback record. And one of the things that happened was that Shellback, this big pop producer, helped us arrange 2 of the songs on the record. And this happened like a couple of days before we went to the States. So we're coming over to the States with this batch of songs, and 2 of them are kind of fucking with our heads because Shellback sent us versions. He's like, we should do the songs like these. We tried to record them in the States, but it didn't work out. So when we went home, we said, let's record these 2 songs with Shellback and the way that he kind of wanted them to be recorded, because the versions are great. So we did, and then we did the press release for the record. We said, you know, we really pushed on the fact that Shellback, that worked with Taylor Swift, helped produce a couple songs on the record, and it made people furious. It made people fuming, and they were just like, these fucking sellouts working with a pop producer. But the interesting part, if you look at the record, the 2 songs that Shellback produces is Electra and 366, and they're the 2 songs that sounds most like old Refused. But people in their minds, they just want to make up this idea that, that you're something that you're not. I went back and listened to the record, and I'm insanely proud of it. There's a couple of things that I've done differently. There's one song on the record that I really don't like. It shouldn't have been on the record. I'm not going to tell you which one. You leave your comments in the comment section if you can guess which one it is. But there's one song on the record I'm like, that doesn't make any sense. It should be on the record. But apart from that, I think it's a bold, adventurous record. We're playing with sonic landscapes a lot. We're playing with different sounds, different ideas. The second song, all the heavy mosh parts are played with an acoustic guitar. There's all these layers to it that is really cool, and I'm really proud of it. Even though it did come out to some mixed reviews, but I think that was inevitable. Like, we put out a record that people celebrate to this day, that I'm sure I'm going to talk about on this show later on. But I think it's a cool record, and I'm really proud of it, and I don't think we could have done it any differently, really. It also was great because it was a departure. So when we did War Music, it evened things out a little bit, I think, because War Music is maybe more what people kind of expected from us. Maybe, I don't know. So yeah, I know the difficulty of putting together a comeback record. I know what it takes, and I know the mental strain that it puts on you, and how it can fuck with your head and fuck with your perception. Even though in your mind you're thinking like, I can do, I don't care what people think, but that's not reality of the situation, because you still care about what you think as a group. Like, why are we doing this? How are we doing this? Yeah. Freedom with Refused. Check it out. It's a pretty cool record. And there you have it. Some comeback records that I like, and a comeback record that it's also pretty good. I've decided that over the summer, in Sweden, that's June, July, August, 3 months, I'm going to do an episode every other week, because I've been pushing myself pretty hard the last couple of months. And after the summer, it's already looking kind of thick with action. So I'm going to treat myself to a little bit of a break. I'm gonna write music, I'm gonna record music, and I'm gonna keep working. But I'm gonna do an episode every other week over the summer, and then I'll be back in full action in September. Yeah, let me know what you think. What's your favorite comeback record? Check out all the other episodes that I have on here. Like, share, subscribe, tell your friends. I need more people to check out my YouTube series. Yeah. Thanks for watching. Until next time, stay well, my friends. Bye-bye.